Ever feel like true crime documentaries only scratch the surface?
Absolutely. So many cases never reach the mainstream.
Exactly. And today we are going deep on an article called 50 Serial Killers You've Never Heard of.
It sounds fascinating. I'm in.
It covers a huge range of killers, all different time periods, countries, motives, you name it.
Yeah, like what connects them all?
Right. So to kick things off, how about a little trip back in time? See how this whole idea of serial killing even came to be.
Okay, well, we could start with Gilles de Rais, 15th century nobleman from France, considered one of the first documented serial killers.
Wow, the 1400s. Talk about going way back.
Yeah, and the accusations against him are just horrifying. Over 140 children murdered, often in like sadistic rituals.
140 children, that's just unbelievable. Especially back then, how could someone operate like that for so long?
Well, that's what makes these historical cases so interesting. You have to consider the context, no modern forensics. Heck, even the idea of a serial killer didn't exist then.
Right, how many cases just slipped through the cracks because people couldn't even imagine someone doing that, killing over and over?
Totally. You know, another example, very different though. Thug Behram, leader of the Thuggee cult in India, 18th and 19th
Oh
century.
yeah, I've heard of them. The thugs. Weren't they like professional assassins?
Well, hundreds of strangulations, that's for sure. Used a ceremonial cloth, part of their rituals.
It's wild, a whole group with their own twisted belief system, not your typical lone wolf serial killer idea.
It does challenge our modern perceptions. Then you have someone like Olga of Kiev, 19th century Russia, a landowner.
A landowner. Not your usual suspect.
Not a traditional serial killer, no hands-on murders. But over 120 of her serfs died because of her forced labor, starvation.
Wow, so systematic cruelty and abuse of power leading to mass death really stretches our definition of what a serial killer is, huh?
Exactly. It's not always direct murder. It can be this pattern of abuse and neglect that results in multiple deaths.
Okay, so from history to more modern times, but still under the radar. Vladislav Tenesky, a journalist in Macedonia, early 2000s.
Oh yeah, Tenesky. He actually wrote about his murders in articles before they caught him.
Talk about a twisted mind.
Total hybristophilia, getting off on the attention his crimes brought him, using his job as a journalist to put himself in the story. Like a game with the police and everyone.
Wow, trying to be a killer celebrity. Makes you wonder about media coverage. Does the attention, even if it's bad, encourage some people?
It's a huge debate. Criminologists have been arguing about it forever. Does the media create a platform for some killers?
No easy answers there, that's for
Okay.
sure. Okay, another modern but lesser-known one, Yang Xinhai, one of China's most prolific killers.
1990s, early 2000s. Targeted families in rural areas. Brutal home invasions.
I remember hearing about that. Just awful, wiping out entire families. What drives someone to do that?
Classic family annihilator. Intense rage, resentment, maybe a need for control. It's a whole category. But his case, and others like it, they force us to ask about what creates this type of violence.
That level of hate towards your own family, it's almost impossible to understand. Any common threads, like warning signs?
Well, it's complex. Domestic abuse, mental illness, isolation, feeling like a failure. But those are risk factors, not guarantees. Every case is different.
Right, like its own dark puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay, this next one is tough. Kermit Gosnell, a doctor in the U.S., practiced for decades, 70s to the 2000s.
Gosnell. Yeah, he was convicted of performing illegal late-term abortions and then killing the infants after they were born alive.
Oh my God. So not just the abortions themselves, but murder. That case was huge. So many ethical and legal questions. Just a horrible betrayal of trust.
Absolutely. Vulnerable women and then innocent lives taken. Horrific.
It's a reminder that evil can hide anywhere, even in places we associate with caring for others.
You're so right. It's scary to think about.
And speaking of scary, Gary Heidnik. Crimes in the 80s in the U.S. Basically a house of horrors in his basement, imprisoning and torturing and killing women.
Sadly, this pattern pops up a lot. The killer creates their own world, exerts total control over the victims. This dark need for power and domination taken to a horrific extreme.
It's the kind of case that stays with you.
Yeah.
Just the level of depravity is hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's important to study these cases, try to understand the motives, but we have to be mindful of the victims, their families, and not like sensationalize it all.
Okay, now strap in because we're moving into the truly unsettling territory of cannibalistic killers. Starting with Karl Dingus, 1920s Germany.
A shopkeeper, can you imagine? Seemed totally normal. But he was killing people, then selling their flesh as pickled meat.
What? That is just, I can't even.
It's one of the most shocking cases out there. It shows you that even the most average person can have these dark secrets. And making a profit from it, disguising it as something else. Just the depravity is unreal.
Wow. And then there's Nikolai Zimaglayev from Kazakhstan, caught eating his friend's body in the 80s, and Ahmad Siraji from Indonesia.
A shaman. Thought he got power from drinking the saliva of his victims. And he had a lot of them.
Cannibalism. It's fascinated and horrified people forever. Rituals, psychosis, sadism. It's a whole other level of darkness.
It's crucial for criminologists and psychologists to understand the why. But yeah, these cases are disturbing, to say the least.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about killers across time and location, but what about methods? This article points out some pretty unique approaches.
Moses Sithole from South Africa in the 90s, for example, pretended to be a charity worker.
Oh, at preying on people's good intentions.
Exactly. Lured its victims in with that, and sexual assault, murder.
Classic angel of death trope, using a position of trust to exploit people. Just despicable, using their compassion against them.
So evil. And it makes you think twice about trusting anyone, even if they seem legit.
It does. You never really know. Okay, so we have deception, but then there's Radik Tagirov, the Volga maniac in Russia. 2010s, 2020s, he just went for it. Targeted elderly women, strangled them in their own homes.
So chilling, so efficient. It shows how vulnerable certain groups are. Elderly people living alone, sadly, they're often seen as easy targets.
And sometimes their cases don't get as much attention as younger victims. It's a sad truth.
It really is. It's like some lives are valued less, but no matter who the victim is, they deserve justice, and the case deserves a full investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. Every life matters.
Okay. Let's talk about a case that just sends chills down my spine. Robert Hansen, the butcher baker in the U.S., 80s, kidnapped women, flew them to Alaska, and hunted them.
Alaska, wow. Talk about remote.
Yeah, the wilderness became his hunting ground. Hunted them for sport.
That's the hunt archetype. The
Yeah.
chase, the capture, that's what they get off on. This need to dominate and control, taken to an extreme level.
It's like something out of a nightmare, treating another person like prey, and this guy was a baker. You just never know. It's that contrast, the normal life hiding the darkness. It's a reminder that anyone can be capable of this. Literally anyone.
We've talked a lot about male serial killers, but women commit these crimes too. The article has some chilling examples. They don't always get as much attention.
It's true, they often challenge our stereotypes about gender and violence. But their stories are just as important, just as disturbing.
Like Jane Toppan, late 1800s, U.S. game. A nurse who used her job to experiment on patients with drugs, ended up killing them.
Another angel of death, using her position to gain access and trust, and then betrayal, leading to death.
It's a total violation of what it means to care for someone. Turning healing into a weapon makes you question who you can trust.
You have to, right?
Yeah.
Even the people we think of as healers.
Okay, this next one is really hard to hear about. Maureen No, U.S., 40s to 60s, killed 8 of her own children.
8? Oh my God.
She said it was SIDs, but finally they figured out what was really happening.
I remember that case. Just unimaginable. A mother killing her own babies. It goes against every instinct.
It does. Some experts thought it might be Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Where the caregiver, usually the mother, makes the person they're caring for sick to get attention.
Yeah. It's terrifying if that's what was going on. What kind of pressure, what internal struggle leads someone to do that?
It's complex, and we can't generalize. Every case of filicide, killing your own child, has its own unique factors rooted in that person's history and psychology.
We've seen betrayal, we've seen twisted maternal instincts, and now religious exploitation. Mariam Soumi, a nun from Greece, 1930s and 50s.
She targeted wealthy women, lured them to her monastery, then killed them for money.
Hiding behind religion, using the sanctity of the church to gain trust, and then...
Like evil can wear any costume, right?
Yeah.
A habit, a doctor's coat, whatever it takes.
It's a good reminder to never blindly trust anyone, no matter how respectable they seem.
Exactly. Be cautious, trust your gut feeling. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about some truly unusual motives. Javed Iqbal from Pakistan in the 90s, he killed 100 boys for revenge.
100 boys. What was the revenge for?
He claimed it was against the police for a previous arrest. Talk about a warped sense of justice.
That is warped. It's not just taking lives, it's a statement, like a sick protest against a system he saw as unfair. But to kill children, horrific.
A terrifying example of how someone seeking justice can become a monster themselves.
It shows you what can happen when anger and resentment consume a person. It can lead to devastating things.
Next, we have Paul Runge, U.S., 90s and 2000s. Targeted women who were selling their homes, pretended to be a buyer to get inside.
So calculated. It shows you how predatory some of these killers are. They exploit normal situations just to find victims.
It's a reminder that danger can be anywhere, even in the mundane things. Makes you question your own safety, even in your home.
You have to be vigilant, aware of your surroundings. It's not about living in fear. It's about being empowered to stay safe.
The article also brings up the possibility that many serial killings go unreported, especially in places with fewer resources or political instability.
That's a huge concern. Access to resources,
Yeah.
the effect of law enforcement, even just the culture around reporting crimes, it all plays a part. There are probably so many cases we never even hear about.
Exactly. It might just be the tip of the iceberg, like Fernando Hernandez Leyva in Mexico. Confessed to killing 137 people in the 80s and 90s, but only convicted of 33.
Wow, that's a huge discrepancy. It's a good example of how hard it is to investigate and prosecute these cases, especially in areas with limited resources or corruption.
It makes you wonder how many more killers are out there operating in the shadows, getting away with it.
It's a chilling thought, and it stresses how important it is to keep improving investigation techniques, communication between agencies, and to address the bigger issues that allow these predators to exist in the first place.
Right. It's not just about catching them after the fact. It's about preventing it from happening. Okay, last one for this section. Ivan Keller, France, 90s and 2000s. Killed elderly women and made it look natural.
So another case of targeting the vulnerable, and then covering his tracks, making it even harder to catch him.
It's like a deadly game, and he's in control. It's amazing how dedicated the investigators are, working so hard to bring these people to justice.
It's truly incredible. The work is emotionally draining, often thankless. But it's so crucial to stop these crimes and bring closure to the families.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deck dive, let's go back to something the article pointed out, the common threads that connect these killers. It's fascinating and scary to see how many similarities there are.
It's key to understanding them. If we can identify those common threads, we get closer to understanding what creates a serial killer. There's no one answer. But these patterns can help prevent and investigate these crimes.
Like the fact that so many of them had traumatic childhoods, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence.
It's a well-documented pattern. Now, not everyone who experiences trauma becomes a killer, but it definitely impacts development, increases the risk of antisocial behavior.
So early intervention is key, right? Support systems, resources for kids who've experienced trauma, that could help prevent future tragedies.
Absolutely. We need to be proactive, address the underlying problems, not just react after the crime has happened.
Another common thread is targeting vulnerable people. Sex workers, runaways, the elderly, people who might not be missed as quickly.
It shows how opportunistic these killers are. They prey on those who are seen as easy targets, marginalized, without strong support systems. It's a sad reflection on society.
It really is. It shows how unequal our world is, how some people are just more vulnerable to violence. We need to create communities where everyone feels safe and valued.
That's the goal. Stronger social safety nets, addressing those systemic issues, those are essential steps.
And lastly, the use of deception. Doctors, journalists, religious figures, even charity workers, using their positions to manipulate and gain access to victims.
It's a hallmark of this type of killer. They're masters of manipulation, charming, disarming. They understand how to exploit people's trust.
It's scary. You think you can trust someone, and then it reminds us to be careful, listen to our gut instincts, and never blindly trust anyone.
You're right, a healthy level of trust is good. But being aware of manipulation is important too. Trust those gut feelings.
This first part of our deep dive has been intense. We've gone from historical figures to modern-day monsters, seen all kinds of depravity, and explored what makes these lesser-known killers tick.
It's been a journey, that's for sure. So many different cultures, time periods, motives. But we've also seen those common threads, the patterns that give us clues about what creates a serial killer.
It's clear that there's still so much we don't know about this dark side of humanity. It's fascinating how, even with all the variation in their backgrounds and methods, we still see these recurring themes pop up in the lives of these serial killers. It almost makes you wonder if there's some kind of shared darkness that drives them.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are they born with this predisposition to violence, or is it shaped by their experiences? It's a nature versus nurture debate that has raged on for ages, and there's no easy answer. But I do think examining the common threads in these cases can give us some clues.
Right, like the fact that so many of them seem to target those who are most vulnerable in society. It's as if they seek out those who are less likely to be missed or whose disappearances might not raise as many alarms.
Exactly. It's a chilling reminder of the inequalities that exist in our world and how they can make certain individuals more susceptible to becoming victims. We often talk about the psychological makeup of serial killers, but it's crucial to remember the societal context as well.
So true. It's like a perfect storm of individual darkness meeting a system that in some ways enables their actions.
Now, another common thread we see in many of these cases is the use of deception. These killers aren't just brute force murderers. They often employ elaborate schemes, manipulate people's trust, and even use their own professions to carry out their crimes.
You see that over and over again in this article. Doctors, journalists, even religious figures who use their perceived authority or respectability to get close to their victims. It's a chilling reminder that appearances can be incredibly deceiving.
It really is. These killers often possess a high level of social intelligence and cunning, which allows them to blend in, to gain people's confidence,
Yeah.
and to operate undetected for long periods of time. Is what makes them so dangerous.
It's like they're playing a twisted game with society, using our own expectations and social norms against us.
And they often seem to take a certain pride in their ability to outsmart the authorities, leaving behind cryptic clues or taunting the police with their actions.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they see themselves as superior, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse.
Okay, so we've talked about the common threads, but what about the things that make these lesser-known cases truly stand out? What were some of the most surprising or unexpected elements you encountered while reading this article?
Honestly, one of the things that struck me was the sheer ingenuity and creativity that some of these killers displayed. They weren't just driven by a blind rage or bloodlust. They often planned their crimes, meticulously thinking several steps ahead and adapting their methods to avoid detection.
It's like they were perversely innovative in a way, constantly seeking new and more effective ways to carry out their dark deeds.
Precisely. It speaks to a certain level of intelligence and a chilling detachment from the consequences of their actions.
Mm.
For some of them, it was almost like they were conducting a macabre experiment, seeing how far they could push the boundaries without getting caught.
And that brings up another point. The article mentions a couple of cases where the killers were incredibly prolific, but they were only apprehended after a long period of time, sometimes due to sheer luck or a seemingly minor slip-up.
Those cases really highlight the challenges faced by investigators in dealing with serial murder. It's a complex and often frustrating process, sifting through mountains of evidence, chasing down false leads, and trying to piece together a puzzle where the pieces are constantly shifting.
It makes you appreciate the dedication and perseverance of those who work in law enforcement, especially those who specialize in hunting down these predators. It's not a job for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
No, it takes a certain kind of person, someone with a keen eye for detail, a relentless pursuit of the truth, and the ability to handle the psychological toll that comes with delving into the darkest recesses of the human psyche.
Speaking of challenging cases, the story of Fernando Hernandez Leyva from Mexico really stuck with me. He confessed to over 100 murders, but was only convicted of a fraction of those crimes. It raises questions about the accuracy of official statistics and the possibility that many serial killings go unreported or unsolved.
Leiva's case is a prime example of how difficult it can be to truly quantify the scope of this problem, especially in parts of the world where resources are limited. Corruption is rampant, or there are cultural barriers to reporting these types of crimes.
It's like there's a whole hidden world of violence and suffering that we might never fully grasp.
I think you're right about that. We tend to focus on the cases that make headlines, but the reality is that there are likely many more stories that remain buried victims whose voices are never heard and killers who escape justice.
It's a sobering thought. It makes you wonder about the factors that allow these killers to operate undetected for so long. Is it simply a matter of luck, or are there systemic issues that make it easier for them to blend in and avoid detection?
It's likely a combination of both. Sometimes it's a matter of being in the right place at the right time, preying on the most vulnerable individuals, or simply being exceptionally skilled at covering their tracks. But there are also broader societal factors that can contribute to the problem.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Lack of resources for law enforcement, inadequate communication between agencies, social stigma surrounding certain types of victims. These are all things that can hinder investigations and allow predators to continue operating with impunity.
That makes sense. It's like a vicious cycle where the most marginalized individuals are most likely to become victims, and their cases are often the ones that receive the least attention or resources.
Exactly.
Mm.
It's a deeply troubling issue, and it underscores the need for greater awareness, better support systems for vulnerable populations, and a more proactive approach to addressing the root causes of violence and inequality.
So, we've talked about the disturbing patterns in these cases, the challenges faced by investigators, and the societal factors that can contribute to the problem. But where do we go from here? What's the lasting impact of this deep dive? What do you hope our listeners take away from this exploration?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that the world of serial killing is far more complex and nuanced than we often perceive it to be.
Mm.
It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism and the shock value, but the reality is that these are real people, real victims, and real communities that are impacted by these horrific acts.
It's about moving beyond the headlines and the stereotypes and recognizing the human cost of these crimes.
Precisely. And I hope listeners come away with a greater understanding of the factors that contribute to these tragedies, not just the psychology of the killers, but also the social context, the vulnerabilities and the systemic issues that allow these predators to thrive.
It's about recognizing the warning signs, being vigilant, and speaking up if we see something that seems off.
Absolutely. We can all play a role in preventing these tragedies by being more aware, by supporting efforts to improve law enforcement and victim services, and by working to create a more just and equitable society where everyone feels safe and valued.
That's a powerful message. It's a reminder that even amidst the darkness, there's always hope and that we have the power to make a difference.
I believe that wholeheartedly. We may not be able to eradicate evil entirely, but we can certainly work to understand it better, to recognize its manifestations, and to create a world where it has less room to flourish.
It's easy to get lost in the darkness exploring these cases, the depravity, the cruelty, but I think we have to remember, even with all that, there's hope. People fighting this evil every day, bringing justice.
Yeah, definitely. You have investigators, forensics experts, victim advocates. They're dedicated to solving these cases, helping the families, trying to stop it from happening again. Their work is so important, but it's tough emotionally, and most people don't even see it.
They're the unsung heroes, for sure, committed to justice no matter how hard or disturbing the case gets. That's inspiring.
It really is. And beyond them, you have researchers, academics trying to figure out why this happens, how to prevent it.
Right, trying to solve this massive puzzle, the psychology, the social factors, even biology, what makes a serial killer.
Exactly. It's everything. Childhood trauma, brain stuff, social inequality, culture. You need a multifaceted approach to understand it.
Okay, so we've gone deep into this world, the lesser-known serial killers. We've seen patterns, motives, confronted some tough realities about human nature. But as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Oh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
We've seen how diverse these killers are. All walks of life, every corner of the world, different backgrounds, methods. So if there's no single profile, no one answer to what makes a serial killer, what does that tell us about evil itself?
Wow. That's a question for the ages, right? Philosophers, theologians, criminologists, they've all wrestled with that. Is evil part of us, waiting to come out? Or is it something we learn, a product of our environment, our choices?
Yeah, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, but just thinking about it, that's important to understand this whole thing.
Totally. It's not easy, and there's no quick fix. But by looking at these cases, trying to get inside their minds, we learn more about what creates this violence, the complex web of factors.
And maybe, with that knowledge, we can find better ways to prevent these tragedies. Recognize the signs, address the problems, help those who are vulnerable. We can create a world where this is less likely to happen.
It's a good goal to have. We may not ever completely get rid of evil, but we can definitely make it less powerful. Make a world where compassion and empathy win and everyone's life is protected and valued.
Well said. I think that's a good place to end our deep dive into the world of these lesser-known serial killers. Thanks for coming on this journey with us, and a huge thank you to our expert for sharing their expertise.
Glad to be here. It's heavy stuff, but I think it's vital to look into these dark parts of humanity if we want to understand and stop these tragedies.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What surprised you? What questions do you still have? Come chat with us on social media. Keep exploring the world of true crime with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.